Chapter 9 Home Time. In terms of importance to truck drivers, home time is right near the top of the list. As a person who is considering becoming a truck driver, it'll likely play a huge role in your decision. Heck, it's probably the biggest thing keeping you from trucking right now. In fact, home time is so important to drivers that I've devoted extra time to this chapter so you'll truly know what to expect and how to make the most of it should you choose to take up trucking. Trucking companies know how important home time is to drivers, and they've come up with all sorts of different ways to give the driver a type of home time he or she needs. A single person may want to stay out for 2, 3, 4 weeks, or even longer because they don't have anything better to do. A family man may want to get home every weekend or more often so he can spend time with his kids. A semi-retired guy may only want to drive part-time so he can still have plenty of time for fishing or golf. The fact is, if you want to drive, you can probably find a schedule that fits your lifestyle. Need to be home every night? You may be able to find a local job that'll let you. Just remember what I said before. The more you're home, the less money you'll make. Now that might not be a big deal to you. Money might not even be your motive for becoming a truck driver. Maybe you just want a better job. For instance, if you're currently working in fast food, you'll likely make more money delivering concrete or lumber to local construction sites while still getting home every night. So if you're not after the megabucks, driving a truck still might be a better option than passing value meals through a drive-through window or slaving over a conveyor belt at the factory. However, in most trucking companies, the big bucks are made when you stay out 2 or 3 weeks, minimum. I know, I'm really starting to sound like a broken record, but I'm trying to cover my gluteus maximus here. The last thing I want for you is to get dollar signs in your eyes and expect to make $50,000 a year driving a concrete truck and sleeping at home every night. It won't happen. This doesn't just apply to regional and local drivers. Even among over-the-road drivers, I've found that the more often you go home, the less money you'll make. Naturally, if you decide to go home every 3 weeks, that third week you'll run fewer miles because you're home for part of that week. If you go home every 2 weeks, then you'll run fewer miles every other week. Plan on being home every week? You get the picture. It's not just a matter of you being at home either. The process of getting you home can hurt your miles too. Here's how this works. Let's say you're 500 miles from the house and you're supposed to be heading home. They've got 10 loads near you, but they're all headed in the opposite direction from your house and will only take you further from home. Check back in tomorrow morning, they say. Oh, that's great. There's plenty of freight to pull and money to be made, but you don't get any of it because it's not heading toward home. You had a full shift to run and were hoping to be home tonight. Even if they find you a load heading home later on that night, you still will have wasted an entire day of money making while you're waiting on that load. Would you rather get shorted miles every 3 weeks or every week? Pick your priority. Here's another example of how going home more often can affect miles. Say you're 250 miles from your house, but you're not due home for 3 days and you're not willing to go home early because you got plans for those 3 days. Your company can't give you any good long runs because you'll get too far away and therefore won't get back home in time. So instead, they give you a little 100-mile run to keep you in the area. The next day, you get another one worth 125 miles. You just got 225 miles over the course of 2 days. If you hadn't been trying to get home, you could have taken that 1,100-mile run they offered you 2 days ago. That's an 875-mile difference. As an example, if you're making, say, 35 cents per mile, that's a loss of $306.25. Ouch. Now, if you want to do that every week, feel free. Not me. Especially since, due to my experience, I now make 50 cents per mile. That difference of $306.25 just turned into $437.50. So that's why as a solo driver, I personally stay out at least 2 weeks, usually 3, sometimes 4 when I'm especially broke. Even when I was team driving with the Evil Overlord, we stayed out for 3 weeks at a time. We tried 2 weeks for a while and noticed the pay cut. Any more than 3 weeks out for us, and as the Evil Overlord says, there would have been a headline in USA Today that said, "Trucker woman kills husband, leaves him laying on side of road." Maybe you can stay out longer. Maybe you shouldn't. You'll have to use trial and error to figure out what home time versus pay schedule works best for you. Hopefully, if you're part of a team, no one will end up with a bungee cord wrapped around their neck before you figure it out. I've still got those marks. Now I can hear you say it.
Will these scenarios happen every time I'm heading home?
Not likely, but make no mistake, they will sometimes. A lot of it depends on luck of the draw or being in the right place at the right time. In a perfect world, that load taking you directly to your house will be ready to go at precisely the moment you need it. But how often is this world perfect? Nearly every time I head home, it's from a different place, so it's next to impossible to plan to be somewhere with loads heading home. One thing is for sure, the more often you go home, the more chances you have of getting ripped on miles. Just remember that it's not the company that's ripping you. You're doing it by choosing to go home more often. It's your choice. So does this mean that you can't make decent money without being away from home for long periods of time? No. It just means you won't make as much money as the driver who stays out longer than you. That's only fair. Now, having said all that about losing money by trying to get home, I need to clarify something. Unless you're single, it's simply not feasible to stay on the road indefinitely just to avoid short mile weeks. Just understand that this is one of those unavoidable negative aspects of trucking. It's akin to tolerating the fact that your spouse picks their toenails and leaves them on the coffee table. You hate it, but you live with it. It also helps to remember that you aren't the only one getting shorted on miles when you go home. Most other drivers go through the exact same thing. Just accept it as part of the trucking industry and just go home like we all do. There are some things you can do to help eliminate some of the problems with getting home on time. 1. Drive locally and be home every night. 2. Drive for a regional carrier. 3. Drive dedicated runs. 4. Drive for a carrier with a terminal near you. Naturally, if you drive locally, you're home every night or a couple of times per week. Problem solved. Also, many local jobs are either salaried or paid by the hour, unlike over-the-road driving, which is usually paid by the mile. Just remember that highly experienced drivers have probably already nabbed the really good paying local jobs. And if you want that job, the current driver will have to die and you'll have to be related to him. At least that's how it seems anyway. A regional carrier is a company that operates in a specified area. For instance, the Northeast, Southeast, or the Midwest, just to name a few. A regional carrier probably won't hire you unless you live within their specified running area. All the loads they run are within a specified radius of their main terminal or limited to a certain number of states. Having all their customers and freight within this region ensures that you're rarely far from the house. This usually translates into being able to get home easier and more often. Unfortunately, this usually means less money also. For instance, I work for a company that paid their over-the-road drivers 4 cents more per mile than their regional drivers. The trade-off was that the regional drivers got home a lot more often. Good, but usually got fewer miles. Bad. So they got fewer miles and less money per mile equals a smaller paycheck than the over-the-road driver. Here's a real-life example from the above-mentioned company. They paid me 50 cents per mile. Remember, I have more pay for more experience. And I averaged 2,500 miles per week as an over-the-road driver. I could be home every other weekend if I choose to. A regional driver with the same amount of experience would only get 46 cents per mile and average only 2,200 miles per week. In exchange for less pay, he got home 3 weekends per month. That's a $238 difference per week. But that doesn't quite tell the whole story. Now, $238 is a big difference already, but when I chose to stay out 3 weeks at a time, my miles usually shot up an average to 2,700 to 2,800 miles per week because I wasn't getting shorted miles trying to get home more often. A 2,700 mile week translated into a $338 difference per week. Some of those weeks, I got as many as 3,000 miles. That would translate to a $488 difference per week. Yowza! Still, that regional driver was home 3 or 4 weekends every month, and I was only home once every 3 weeks. So if you want to be home more often, a regional carrier may be a good choice for you. Dedicated runs are great for getting home a lot. The problem is finding one. When a trucking company establishes a dedicated run, it's usually nabbed up immediately by one of their current longtime drivers. The closer you live to a big city, the better chances you'll have of getting one. Still, you're going to have to call everyone and God to even locate one of these runs. Good luck. You'll need it. You can also search for them through a large national carrier, a regional carrier, or a local company. Now, let me make one thing clear. All things called dedicated are not equal. There are dedicated accounts and there are dedicated runs. Either could work for you, or not. The word dedicated is thrown around a lot in the industry. Make sure you know which one you're getting into. A dedicated run is a repeating trip from point A to point B and back. For example, say you pick up a load at the same customer in St. Louis every day and deliver it in Chicago. You either run back with an empty trailer to St. Louis or you bring another load back with you. That's a 600-mile round-trip run every day and you get to sleep in your own bed every night. That's sweet, right? Well, that depends. How many days per week do you run it? Does it pay per mile? If it's only 3 trips each week, 1,800 miles per week sucks. However, if it's 5 runs, that's 3,000 miles, which is outstanding. This is the type of stuff that How to Find a Great Truck Driving Job can help you with. Again, there's a link in the text version and in the appendix. Even if it's paid by salary, the miles will still matter. You'll need to get out the calculator and do some math to determine if the salary will make sense if the miles are unsteady and you run 1,800 miles one week and 3,000 miles the next. The salary may be great if you only run 1,800 miles every week, but blows chunks if it's closer to 3,000 miles. I should also point out that a dedicated run can be more than just out and back. You might go to 3 or 4 cities every day and get back home every night. Or it might be a dedicated run that covers multiple cities and takes 2 days to complete, meaning you'll be home every other night instead of every night. The important thing to remember here is that a dedicated run is always the same run, and knowing that helps to plan your life. Again, dedicated runs are great if you can find one near your home and don't mind making less money than an over-the-road driver. A dedicated account, sometimes known as a dedicated fleet, is not from point A to point B and back like a dedicated run. A dedicated account is where you haul loads for a specific company only. There are a gazillion dedicated accounts out there, but let's use a specific example to make this easier to explain. As you can imagine, Walmart has massive amounts of freight that needs to be moved. They have their own fleet of trucks, but still need to hire outside help to cover all their shipping needs. They accomplish this by hiring other trucking companies to help them out. One of these carriers may hire you to work for them, but you only haul Walmart freight. You don't work for Walmart, but you haul their freight exclusively. Your truck is dedicated to Walmart.
Is that a good thing?
Well, that depends on what you're looking for. Since you only haul freight for Walmart, you'll quickly learn all the places that you pick up and deliver. Therefore, you won't always have to search for some new place and deal with incorrect or extremely vague customer directions. Check out the link in the text version to an article I wrote about truckers and their bad directions. It could also mean that you'll have less load or unload time than driving over the road. Many dedicated accounts are even 100% drop and hook, which simply means that you arrive, drop your trailer, grab another, and hit the road again. Hence the name. Drop one, hook another. Having less load or unload time and more drop and hook are both good things. But as I've said 100 times before, it also usually pays less for the convenience. For example, when the Evil Overlord and I drove for a dedicated account, we got paid 5 cents less per mile than the regular over-the-road drivers within the company. You can imagine how happy we were with that. In addition, rather than running you in a region that's close to home, dedicated accounts may still have you running all over the map, but at least you'll know where you're going every time because you've been there before. Now that you know what a dedicated account is, you can probably see why it's not as good for getting home as a dedicated run. You're probably home less often for one. Still, it might be a better option than over the road for getting home if you live near one of the pickup or delivery locations. That way, at least you know there's freight running toward your home on a regular basis. The last way that could possibly help you get home more often is to work for a carrier that has a terminal near you. A terminal is simply a location from which a company operates. Most large national carriers have a home office or headquarters and terminals in many large cities across the country. One advantage of hiring on with a company with a terminal near you is that you won't have far to travel to get to orientation, which is a 2 to 5 day hiring process that all new employees are required to attend. We have a whole chapter on orientation later on. Living close to a terminal helps you get home because a trucking company typically has a large number of customers near its terminals. That's usually precisely why they have a terminal there in the first place. It just makes sense that if a company based in California has several customers in Newark, New Jersey, it's wise to have trucks near that location. Because lots of freight is coming and going, you stand to have a better chance of getting home in a timely manner. This is true for regional, over-the-road, or dedicated accounts and runs. Having said all that, I need to reiterate that you shouldn't make a decision who to work for based solely on which company has a terminal close to you. You need to examine the entire picture. A trucking company may be right down the block from your house, but they're paying 10 cents less per mile than a company 1,000 miles away. 10 cents per mile less may not sound like much for the convenience of a nearby terminal. But try throwing a dime out the window every time you pass a mile marker on the highway. See if that doesn't put things into perspective for you. And please let me know where you'll be doing this experiment so I can follow you for a while. I ain't got nothing against dimes. So if you run 600 miles one day, you just made $60 less that day than a guy running the same miles but making 10 cents more per mile than you do. That's a big deal. Still, pay isn't everything. There may be other factors that make the home terminal a good option. I can't say it enough. It's an absolute necessity to fully check out every company before you hire on with them. Again, here's where the checklist in the back of How to Find a Great Truck Driving Job can help. Here's one of my experiences. I have a large national trucking company in a town not far from my house. Of course, we checked them out early in our job search. Unfortunately, they didn't have a very good pay package for team drivers at the time, so we looked elsewhere. After the evil overlord quit trucking, I reevaluated that company. I still didn't go to work for them because I didn't like their home time policy. The point is that you're likely to get screwed if you hire on with a company just because of their location. Because as you're about to find out, you can live anywhere and work for just about anybody. Where you live doesn't usually determine who you can work for because it's a common practice to take your truck home with you. It's extremely important that you realize you don't have to live near a trucking company's headquarters or a terminal to work for them. This concept is especially hard for non-truckers to grasp. It's hard for them to believe that they can live on the East Coast and work for a company based on the West Coast, or vice versa. Not every trucking company hires nationwide, but the majority of over-the-road carriers do. There are exceptions such as local driving, certain dedicated runs or accounts, and regional carriers. With these, you usually need to live within a certain number of miles of a certain location. That only makes sense. It wouldn't be logical for you to drive in the Southeast region if you live in the Northeast, or take a dedicated run from Dallas to San Antonio if you live in Oklahoma City, even if they would hire you. Which they won't. If you're planning on driving over the road, you're going to have a vast number of companies to choose from. There are simply not enough drivers who live close to the company's home office or terminals to limit their hiring to those locations. Most large national carriers are forced to hire nationwide to keep their trucks full. Since most drivers probably won't live anywhere near a company terminal, it's common practice for drivers to take their trucks home with them for their home time. If you do choose to work for a company with a terminal near you, for security reasons, most companies will want you to leave the truck at the terminal when you go home. This can be a good thing because you don't have to find somewhere to park the truck when you're off duty. Furthermore, if the terminal has a shop, it's also handy to get any repairs or maintenance done while you're enjoying your home time. If you don't live near a terminal, you'll need to find a place to park your truck when you're home. Your company may want to approve the location before you go home the first time. If you don't have room at home, you can usually park it at a local truck stop. Some will charge a fee, others won't. One thing I would suggest is that you make sure you ask the truck stop manager if it's okay for you to park there. That's because an hour employee probably won't care, but the manager might. The last thing you need is to come back to work to find your truck has been towed. Try explaining that one to your company. I live out in the sticks, so I had to get permission to park at a nearby chicken house. Is that rural enough for you? Yeehaw! Population 423. Salute! Once again, if you guys have no idea what I just did there, check out the link. Another thing you have to remember about parking at home is that a truck is a lot heavier than your minivan, so make sure you park it somewhere it won't sink into the mud. That's another phone call that you don't want to make, because it's a good bet that the cost of that tow truck will be coming out of your pocket. And those big rig tow trucks don't come cheap. If you're parking at a terminal, some companies will require that you get all your stuff out of the truck so they can immediately put another driver in it. This is called slip seating. This practice is usually a major turnoff to drivers, and for this reason, the carriers with over-the-road fleets are largely doing away with it. Over-the-road drivers like to get assigned a truck so they can treat it as their home away from home. Typically, you'll only find slip seating in local or regional jobs nowadays. Our truck broke down one time and our company wanted to slip seat us into another truck to keep us moving. We opened the door of the other truck and got blasted with BO. It almost made the evil overlord puke. We had to argue with the company about it, but we ended up waiting on our truck to be fixed. It was that or the evil overlord was quitting and flying home. It was that gross. Now, because we refused the available truck they offered, they wouldn't pay for our hotel. Therefore, we had to pay for the room out of pocket. This was the same company I talked about at the beginning of the book with the weird security policy that we hated. Besides jumping from truck to truck, slip seating sucks because completely cleaning out your truck every time you go home is a real pain in the rump roast. Unhooking your CB and all your other electronics is a major hassle. For those who don't live near a terminal, like me, most carriers have no problem letting you take your truck home when your home time rolls around.
Just exactly how much time off do I get when I go home?
Well, that all depends on the type of driving you do. A local driver may either work 9 to 5 or the graveyard shift, enabling him or her to be home every day. Regional drivers may get home 24 to 48 hours on the weekend or even more often, depending on when freight needs to be picked up or delivered. The semi-retired driver we talked about earlier might get 2 weeks off after working for 2 weeks. Man, I wish I were that guy. Then again, if he's out of the truck for that long, he's definitely slip seating every time. That would suck. There really isn't a standard amount of time off that you get with the local and regional carriers. It all depends on how that particular company operates or the schedule they put you on. You should definitely know what that schedule is before you hire on with them. If you're working over the road, things are a bit more standardized. Most companies set a standard time out, time off ratio. For instance, one company might say 1 day off for every 7 days out. Another might say you get 2 days off for every 7 days out. There are many other variations depending on your situation. This is just another factor you have to consider when choosing a company to drive for. To make things even more confusing, one company may have over-the-road, regional, dedicated, part-time, and local drivers, all with different home time schedules and pay rates. Paid vacation time is usually not available the first year. After the first year, you typically get 1 week paid vacation. After 2 to 3 years, it's usually 2 weeks. After that, it can vary quite a bit, ranging from 2 weeks maximum all the way up to 5 or 6 weeks paid vacation. Your vacation pay is usually paid as an average of what you made over the previous year. There's one more thing about vacation pay. Make sure you actually get vacation time. We assumed it once and were shocked when they later informed us that it was included in the mileage pay. Talk about a grumpy day. The home time schedules set by carriers are not necessarily set in stone. Special circumstances are always taken into consideration, such as medical or personal leave. Remember the 4 months when the evil overlord couldn't drive? That was a medical leave. There have also been times when we wanted to take an extra couple of days off that we really hadn't earned. I can't recall one single time that we were denied an extra day or two, probably because we didn't do it very often. So if you've only earned 2 days off but really need an extra day, just ask. Just don't make a habit out of it. Although a trucking company isn't making any money if the truck isn't moving, the good ones generally want to keep you happy, and an extra day off now and then isn't going to get you fired, as long as you ask before you do it, of course. Heck, I had a boss one time that told me he just had to fire a guy, but only after the guy had rolled his truck over for the 3rd time. So I think you're fairly safe asking for an extra day off now and then without the threat of getting fired.
When can I go home?
Again, this largely depends on the schedule you're on. If you're anything but over the road, you will, or should, know before you hire on as to when and how you can expect to get home. For over-the-road drivers, it's usually a matter of telling your fleet manager a week or two before the days you're requesting. I make it a habit to request my next home time as soon as I come back to work after my previous time off. I've always found that the earlier you request your dates, the better chance of getting them. This is especially true around the holidays. If you know you want the 4th of July off, or any other holiday for that matter, be sure you request it as soon as possible, even if that means 2 or 3 months or more in advance. As you can imagine, you aren't the only one who wants to have bottle rocket wars, effectively setting the yard, the dog, and your eyebrows on fire. And let's not forget the annual full-volume operatic singing of the Star-Spangled Banner, while posing like the Statue of Liberty with a bursting Roman candle overhead. Unfortunately, a carrier can't always let everyone off at the same time, so ask early. FCFS is known in trucking, or first come, first served. The exception to this is Christmas. I have yet to work for a company that didn't tell me they'd get me home for Christmas if I so desired. But there are drawbacks to this also. Expect a bad paycheck the week before, because there usually isn't very much freight moving right before Christmas. The dock workers that load trucks are, unlike you, enjoying time off from work. Also keep in mind that getting home for Christmas doesn't necessarily mean all of Christmas Eve and a couple of days after. You may get home the evening of Christmas Eve and be expected to roll bright and early on December 26th. It all depends on when freight needs to be moved at that time. One time we even had to leave around 2 a.m. on the 26th after a long day of Christmas goodness. It's not much fun trying to drive all night after eating 15 pounds of Christmas fudge. Now, we don't have kids, so getting home for one day just wasn't usually worth the bad paycheck to us. To offset that bad paycheck, many companies offer cash bonuses to work through some of the holidays.
Well now, is it worth it?
Here's a holiday tip from way too many years of over-the-road experience. If a company offers you a bonus to work through any holiday, make sure that it's worth your while, because despite what they say, it's a good possibility that you'll spend it sitting at a truck stop. A week or two before the holiday, they'll start to beg and plead and tell you that they have freight that has to be moved over the holiday. But when the time comes, if you don't have a good long load by Friday afternoon, you may as well whip out the PlayStation and warm up your fingers. Look at it logically. If a load isn't loaded by Friday afternoon and no one is at work loading trucks Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, you're pretty much getting hosed. We learned this the hard way by sitting at many a truck stop over a holiday weekend. That makes for a really grouchy weekend. Another thing that can happen is that too many drivers take the company up on working through the holidays. When this happens, there are too many drivers for the few loads available, which leaves more than a few unhappy, non-moving drivers. One of the worst problems with home time is trying to schedule appointments. To be more precise, scheduling them isn't the problem. It's being home on the day of the appointment that presents the problem. Anybody who's tried to get an appointment at the doctor's or dentist's office knows that you sometimes have to schedule these appointments 6 months in advance. Who do these people think they are? Doctors? Oh yeah. Well, anyway, as you may have figured out already, getting home on an exact day isn't a guarantee. So how can you make sure you get to the dentist so your teeth don't start turning a pale shade of green? You've got to work the system. During one job hunt, I called a trucking company that was close to home. It was sounding really good until I asked the recruiter about their home time policy. Across the phone line, a cheery, upbeat voice said, "Just tell us what days you want, and we'll have you home within 9 days of your requested home time." A sphincter says, "What?" I thought she was joking. She wasn't. After I verified that I didn't have a rare fungus growing out of my ears that made me hear things incorrectly, I got off the phone ASAP. Let me explain why I bailed out of that conversation so quickly. Keep in mind that when I'm going home, I've probably only earned a maximum of 2 to 4 days off. That means if I had an appointment on August 9th, this company could get me there on the 9th. Or they could get me there as early as August 1st, in which case, having only 4 days off, I have to go back to work before my appointment time. Or they could get me home as late as August 18th, which means I didn't get home in time for my appointment. I use this as an example of a worst case scenario because, quite frankly, it's the worst home time policy I've ever come across. And that's saying something, because although I've only worked for 6 different carriers during my driving career, I've talked to countless companies to find those 6. I don't know if that company still has the same home time policy because I never bothered calling back. I figured that having such a horrible policy meant that the company must not give a rip about their drivers' personal lives. There are too many other good carriers to choose from, so keep looking if you find a home time policy that seems absurd. Here's a real-life example that's far more typical. This is one way you could work the system. Now stick with me here, this could get confusing. You may want to get the text version so you can follow along and go over this again. Say I've only earned 2 days off and I still have that appointment scheduled for August 9th. What days do I request off? The 8th and 9th? Well, if they get me home a day early, I'll have the 7th and 8th off, and I'll have to request an extra day off to make my appointment on the 9th. If I get home on the 8th, that's perfect. If I get home on the 9th, it all depends on whether I get home before my appointment time or not. If I have an afternoon appointment and I get home in the morning, no problem. If I get home late that afternoon, I'll have to call and set another appointment for 6 months out. Now that's a pain in the tuchus. Okay, now if I request the 9th and 10th and they get me home early, I'll make my appointment. If they get me home on the 9th, again, it depends on what time the appointment is. Getting home on the 10th is too late. Sorry, you'll have to reschedule. As you can see, there's not much leeway, is there? Every now and then your company may get you home 2 days late, but this isn't very typical, at least not with most large carriers. Getting home 2 days late every now and then is acceptable and understandable. Rarely getting home on time is not. If your company rarely gets you home on time, start looking for your next employer. As you can see, it's clear that taking 2 days off doesn't work very well. Do you see where this is going?
So how can I possibly expect to make an appointment on a specific day?
Work the system, man. Or woman. The best way we've discovered is to set your home time so that you've earned at least 3 days off. That probably means staying out for 2 or 3 weeks, depending on your company's home time policy. This is just one more reason that as a team, we always stayed out for at least 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and I usually still do as a solo driver. So here's how to have the best chance of making that appointment. Let's say you've been a good little driver and earned 3 days off. Schedule your appointment for as late as you can on your middle day off. Back to our scenario. So now I've earned 3 days off, so I request the 8th, 9th, and the 10th. I've set my appointment for 3 or 4 p.m. on the 9th, which is the middle day. If they get me home a day early, I get the 7th, 8th, and 9th off. Appointment made. If I get home on the 8th as requested, appointment made. If they get me home late, but in the morning or early afternoon on the 9th, I still make my appointment. Now this is not a foolproof system. Nothing is in trucking, but it's the best system we've come up with, and it works the vast majority of the time. Once we figured out this system, I can honestly say that we probably only missed a couple of appointments. Now that's not bad considering that there are 2 of us and we've been driving since 1997. All that may seem like common sense, but it took us a while to figure out how to best get home for appointments. Each company works a little differently when it comes to home time. I realize that you aren't stupid, despite what your better half says, and you would have figured this all out on your own given enough time. But this book has been written to save you that time and help you make an informed decision about a career change. So now you know that if you've got a monthly appointment of any kind, you don't have to rule out trucking on the basis that you'll miss your appointments. Finding a trucking company to drive for is easy. Finding a good one is hard. I'm sure you figured that out by hearing this last chapter. There are many more important questions you'll need to ask prospective employers than what we've just discussed, and that's just the topic of home time. There are oodles of other questions you need to be sure to ask in order to find the company that fits most of your needs. Again, that's precisely why I'm writing How to Find a Great Truck Driving Job, so you don't have to go through all the trial and error that we did just to find a driving job that'll suit you. That trial and error period can really wear on you. You may start thinking that you chose the wrong career, when in reality, you chose the wrong company. And again, there's a link to that book in the show notes, or in the appendix, or you can go straight to abouttruckdriving.com. For most truckers, being away from home and family is by far the worst aspect of trucking. Apparently, not for everyone, though. I once overheard a trucker who said he was supposed to be home for 5 days, but went back out on the road after 3 because his kids were driving him nuts. Poor guy. Loose for himself must have spawned those kids. And there is reason number 3 for unclehood. For many drivers, including us, the worst aspect of being away from home was the lack of a social life with friends and family. We missed tons of family reunions, holidays, and birthdays. Heck, we weren't even usually home for our own birthdays. Then again, your own birthday gets less and less important the higher that first digit of your age gets, so that never really mattered to us much. But if you like to get stupid on your birthday, well, I guess it's your birthday. Just try not to dismember the garden gnomes again this year. I swear they're not plotting against you. Some things we miss by choice, simply because we'd lose too much money trying to get home for every little event. Other times we tried to get home like the Dickens, but there just wasn't any freight moving to get us home in time. Even if you request a particular day off weeks in advance, most companies won't guarantee you'll get home for it. They will try is about all you're going to get out of them. Guarantees are hard to come by in trucking. They'll do their best, but even the good companies can't pull off miracles. Is this to say that you can't get into trucking because you don't want to miss your son's graduation or your daughter's wedding? No. After all, it's a father's obligation to be there to give his daughter away to that worthless excuse for a son-in-law and issue that one final menacing threat. Things like this are once in a lifetime, and your company will treat them as such. I won't issue you a guarantee either, but I will tell you that by and large, if you've got something extremely important, the large carriers will bust their hump to get you home for it. Here's a testimony to that. I talked to a driver who had recently been through a situation like this. He had thought he was going to miss his son's college graduation because his company didn't have any freight running that way. Since he had informed his boss of this event months in advance, he was naturally more than a bit hacked off. They told him that if they couldn't get him there in time using his truck, they'd front him the cost of a plane ticket so he wouldn't miss it. And notice they didn't offer to pay for it, just front the cost. I told you, no guarantees. They said they'd deduct it from his check over a period of time. Still, it shows what they were willing to do to get him there for something so important. Turns out they didn't have to. Rather than leave him sitting, they booked some freight through an outside freight broker who had a load that would get him to the graduation in time. But hey, it's the thought that counts. He got there with time to spare, and it made him more loyal to the company from there on out. They treat emergencies with the same respect. If your spouse had a bad car accident and wound up in the hospital, they'd likely fly you home and let you pay it back later. Now, if she just broke her arm, that's a different story. That's not exactly life-threatening. Heck, I get that for leaving the shower curtain open. Although I have been well trained in toilet seat procedures. But serious situations get the respect they deserve. Remember that devastating F5 tornado that hit Oklahoma City in 1999? Along with that storm cell came a smaller F4 that hit Hayesville, Kansas, which is just south of Wichita. It went right down the street where my wife's grandparents and uncle lived. Her grandmother and uncle escaped with severe injuries. Her grandfather didn't make it. Understandably, she wanted to be there for the rest of her family. The company we worked for told us to take as much time off as we needed. We had just delivered a load in Chicago, but unfortunately they didn't have any freight going to Kansas just then. When the evil overlord made the decision to fly from Chicago to Wichita, the company offered to front the cost of the ticket. Since we had the money, we declined, and I dropped her off at the O'Hare Airport. I got to Wichita as soon as they found a load heading in that direction. She stayed with the family for a couple of extra weeks, and the company let me run solo until she was ready to get rolling again. When a company works with you during times of emergency, you really appreciate it. Things like that pay off for a company because it shows they understand you have a life outside of trucking, and that makes you more loyal to them. As I said earlier, all this boils down to deciding whether the trade-off of money for time away from home is worth it to you or not. If you're considering driving over the road, the lack of home time will likely be a key factor as to whether you pursue a career as a truck driver. If you don't mind being away from home, but your spouse wants you home, you've likely lost the battle, and that's probably a good thing. If both of you can't agree that truck driving is the right career path for you and your family, then you may want to look elsewhere. If you go ahead without their blessing, you'll undoubtedly regret your career decision every time you call home. Still, that doesn't mean they won't agree to something that gets you home more often. You could always run regional and get home once a week or more, or run local and be home every night. Need I say it again? For less money. Speaking of spouses, let me give you a warning. I'm just going to come out and say it. Being a truck driver is hard on a marriage. We all know divorce rates are high, but I'd be willing to bet that it's an even higher percentage among truckers, especially over-the-road drivers. It seems like every trucker I talk to has been divorced at least once. Not all of them, but more often than not. Being away from your family is hard on everyone. It's easy for a spouse to get overwhelmed having to run the household and feed the rugrats all by herself. You're never there when the hot water tank starts spewing water or the car breaks down. To her, it seems like she's working her tail off while you're out gallivanting around the highways and byways of America. When you get home, the last thing you want to do is leave the house, yet your spouse has been looking at that god-awful wallpaper the entire time you're gone. She wants to get a babysitter and drag your screaming butt to the mall. You don't want to go. A fight ensues. You go back on the road. Rinse and repeat. You get the gist. This isn't a lecture on the sanctity of marriage. It's just the truth. And it's a truth that you should know about before you make a hasty decision and head off to truck driving school. Okay, now back to the subject. Again, let me make one thing completely clear. Please make sure you remember that when I speak, I'm speaking of large national carriers. I have never worked for a small company, and I doubt I ever will. Are there good small carriers? You bet. There are probably plenty of great ones that I know nothing about. Are there bad large carriers? Yep. But large carriers are more of a known entity than a small carrier, and they can't afford to be awful employers. If word gets around that they stink, they can't get drivers. Without drivers, they can't move freight, i.e., they don't get paid. If a large carrier is bad, you'll likely hear about it, but a small company may go under the radar.
But the smaller carrier will treat me like family. Says so in their ad.
Uh-huh. And I've got a lovely little igloo in El Paso that I'm selling for dirt cheap. Seriously, I doubt that small company's president is going to invite you over for dinner anytime soon. You're just an employee. Some of the big companies say that too. They too are full of bull when it comes to treating you like family. They may actually treat you great, but like family? Do you really believe that? Yeah? Well, you better hurry. There's a bidding war surrounding that igloo. So do yourself a favor. Until you know what's going on with the trucking industry, go to work for a fairly large carrier. By fairly large, I'm talking 100 trucks or more. 100 trucks may sound like a lot, but it's really not, considering that many of the nation's largest carriers have more than 10,000 trucks. There are many, many large carriers out there to choose from.
Well, how do I know how big a company is?
Call and ask them. It's as simple as that. That's actually one of the questions I have on the checklist in how to find a great truck driving job. Psst, you can find that
about truckdriving.com.
Being an over-the-road driver all these years, I've heard plenty of horror stories about how badly drivers are treated. How they're forced to wait at docks for hours on end to get loaded or unloaded. How they never get home on time. How they're forced to stay on the road for months at a time. How they're forced to run illegal. How when they do get home, they're forced to come back to work earlier than they're supposed to. How run down their truck is and how much it breaks down. Even how their paycheck bounced when they tried to cash it. When I ask what company these drivers work for, 9 times out of 10 it's a carrier that I've never heard of. Translation, a small company.
Yeah, but what about the 10th time?
Yes, it's a large carrier. We all have bad days, and that includes all carriers, both large and small. In this disgruntled driver's defense, I too have been treated badly, waited on docks, not got home on time, asked, never forced, to come back to work early, and driven a lemon of a truck that liked to break down on me. The key here is that yes, it has happened, but that it shouldn't happen on a regular basis. I've also badmouthed a company when I was having a particularly bad day. However, I have never been forced to stay out for months at a time, nor have I had a payroll check bounce. These are two things that just aren't likely to happen with a large company. Will I guarantee it? Nope. Not too long ago, one of those large carriers proved my point. I won't name names, but you don't have to worry about them anymore. They went out of business in a big way, and even if they came back, they wouldn't be able to hire any drivers. Not unless the sneaky devils come back with a new company name at least. Just take comfort in knowing that a large carrier going down in a flame of glory is the exception, not the rule. As far as being asked to run illegal, I can't say that I've been blatantly asked to do so. Now, there have been times when I've accepted a load that my fleet manager and I were both well aware that I couldn't run legally. It's just that neither of us bothered to mention it out loud. I can honestly say that I have never been forced to run illegal. In fact, all the large carriers I've worked for have systems in place to make sure you don't run illegal. There's just too much at risk for them if you get caught or have an accident. If they get in a bind with a load that has to move, they may occasionally look the other way. Just don't expect them to acknowledge it or back you up if you get caught. Okay, I feel that I need to explain my comments about having run illegal in the past. What I meant by that is that I may fudge the log a little if I get held up in traffic or something like that, but I have never run 2 logbooks. That's where one is falsified to look legal and the other is what you're actually doing. Drivers do this so they can figure out ways to cheat later on. Or have I driven for extended periods of time without sleep? Nor do I recommend you do so. There's plenty of money to be made legally. Besides, you may not even have a choice in the matter before too long. That's because most of the large carriers are converting to electronic logs, and in my experience, it's dang near impossible to cheat those things, despite what some full-of-bull truckers say. And I don't think the small trucking companies and owner-operators will escape e-logs forever either. There's a massive push in the industry to get electronic logs in all trucks. I'd be shocked if they didn't succeed eventually. The consequences of running illegal can be more severe than you think. A logbook violation may only cost a couple of $100, but if you have an accident while running illegal, you're up doo-doo creek. In any accident involving a truck, the first thing the police officer will want to look at is your logbook to see if you're running illegal. If you just killed someone with your truck and you were running illegal, you may have written yourself a long-time reservation at a jailhouse near you. Seriously, it's happened plenty of times before. I hope you like cuddling with big furry men. I shouldn't even have to say this, but I will. If you're new to trucking or still only considering a trucking career, do not go out and buy a truck. Drivers who own the trucks that they drive are called owner-operators. You'll sometimes see that written as O/O. Sometimes they own more than one truck and hire other drivers to drive them. Whatever you do, stay away from this, at least in the beginning. Heck, my best year as a solo driver, I grossed $66,000. Granted, I've got a lot of experience, but even as a rookie, you'll likely bring home as much or more money as some of the owner-operators out there. When you pick up those free trucking magazines at the truck stop, you'll undoubtedly see advertisements that say something like, Our company drivers make $50,000 per year. Our owner-operators make $125,000. When you see this, please keep in mind that both of these amounts are gross pay amounts. As a company driver, you'll only have taxes, insurance, and maybe some investments deducted from your gross pay. An owner-operator will have all this too, plus all his expenses such as tolls, tags, truck payment, truck insurance, maintenance, road taxes, and the real killer, fuel. All in all, that owner-operator may or may not end up bringing home as much as you, but you can bet your buns he's working 10 times harder for it than you are. If you think you'd like to eventually own your own truck, more power to you. Just know that being an owner-operator is a whole new world you can't possibly begin to comprehend right now. You'll deal with road taxes, fuel taxes, licensing, and 8 million other things I have no clue about. I've been driving for years, and I still don't understand everything about it. So how could you stand a chance as a brand new driver? Still considering it? Well, if you must go owner-operator, at least consider leasing on with the carrier before you go buy a truck and strike out on your own. Leasing with a carrier is like going halfway between being a full owner-operator and a company driver. You own the truck and pay for all its expenses while they book the freight and bill the customers. Many companies also offer discounts on fuel, maintenance, and insurance. You can probably lease your truck cheaper through them too. You're still an owner-operator, you're just not going whole hog and losing your hiney in the process. The Evil Overlord and I strongly considered becoming owner-operators early in our career, primarily because everyone kept telling us that owning your own truck was where the big money was. After doing the math, it just didn't make sense to us. Throughout the years, we've seen fuel prices rise and fall, causing many owner-operators to sell their trucks. I'm still glad we never got into it. We've made plenty of money as company drivers without ever having the risk of owning our own truck. Need an example of why you shouldn't buy your own truck in the beginning? One time I noticed my truck was showing low voltage on the electrical gauge. Another advantage of working for a large company is that they'll have someone available 24/7 to take care of you, whether it be a fleet manager or, in this case, a member of the maintenance department. The company's maintenance guy sent me to the closest truck stop, where the shop informed me that I had a bad alternator and one bad battery out of 4. They fixed it, and as I was signing the bill, I glanced at the total cost and nearly dropped the pen. $768 for an alternator and one battery. Holy bamoly. I'm sure I've had many comparable repairs in the past, but what made this particular time different was that it truly sunk in how much money it took to maintain a truck. If I had owned that sucker, I would have been writing a personal check for $768 rather than signing as a company representative and letting the company pay for it. Now, I had always unconsciously known it. I had noticed that a tire cost $200 or more and that an oil change cost almost $200, but it never fully registers when you aren't the one paying for it. Thankfully, because I was a company driver and not an owner-operator, the company paid the bill. So do you want to foot that kind of bill when you're just starting a new career? Even worse, what if you buy a lemon truck because you don't know what you're looking at? A $15,000 engine rebuild won't hurt that bad, will it? What if you're listening to this and you think trucking will be great, but when you get out here, you realize you were dead wrong? Or worse, you like it, but your spouse changes their mind. Now you're stuck with trying to sell a truck. No, it's best to get into trucking by driving for someone else, more specifically, a large trucking company. If the truck breaks down, the company pays to fix it or gives you another truck. If you wind up hating trucking, you walk away. Let's you and I both leave owner-operating to the pros. Next up, we're going to discuss something that I'm asked about all the time.
How in the world can you stay awake while driving for 10 or 11 hours at a time?
That's a darn good question. Amphetamines. Lots and lots of amphetamines. Only kidding. Really? I guess I shouldn't be joking about this topic, especially with the false reputation that truckers have concerning drugs. I myself have never done drugs and don't see any reason to start now. Since I know you already have a curiosity about trucking, I'm guessing you've already wondered if you could stay awake too.